The Andijan massacre occurred when Uzbek Interior Ministry and National Security Service troops fired into a crowd of protesters in Andijan in Uzbekistan on 13 May 2005. Estimates of those killed on 13 May range from 187, the official count of the government, to several hundred. A defector from the SNB alleged that 1,500 were killed. The bodies of many of those who died were allegedly hidden in mass graves following the massacre. The Uzbek government at first said the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan organized the unrest and the protesters were members of Hizb ut-Tahrir. Critics argue that the Islamist radical label is just a pretext for maintaining a repressive regime in the country, where the troops fired indiscriminately to prevent a color revolution or acted legitimately to quell a prison break is also disputed. A third theory is that the dispute was really an interclan struggle for state power. The Uzbek government eventually acknowledged that poor economic conditions in the region and popular resentment played a role in the uprising. It was claimed that calls from Western governments for an international investigation prompted a major shift in Uzbek foreign policy favoring closer relations with Asian nations. Although the Uzbek government is known to have close ties with the U.S. government, and the Bush administration had declared Uzbekistan to be vital to U.S. security because it hired out a large military base to U.S. military forces, the Uzbek government ordered the closing of the United States Air Base in Kashi-Khanabad and improved ties with the People's Republic of China and Russia, who supported the regime's response in Andijan. Trial of businessmen. The protesters initially asked for the release of 23 local businessmen who were arrested on 23 June 2004 and charged with extremism, fundamentalism and separatism. The police subsequently charged them with membership in the Islamistic Acrimia, an organization the government has designated and banned as terrorist. The businessmen denied the charge, saying they were arrested because of their growing support among the local populace. Some accounts suggest that the arrests occurred as part of a purge of allies of Andijan's longtime provincial governor, Kobalhan Obidov, who had been impeached and replaced with Saidullo Bagalayev, allegedly at the behest of President Islam Karimov. Melissa Hooper, a U.S. lawyer in Tashkent who worked with the defense in the trial, said on 14 May, "This is more about the businessmen acquiring economic clout, and perhaps refusing to pay off the local authorities, than about any religious beliefs." Andrei Grozin, head of the Central Asia and Kazakhstan Department of the Institute of CIS Countries, said in an interview conducted by Rossiyskaya Gazeta that authorities used the trial to take away the business of several entrepreneurs under a clearly trumped-up pretext. During the trials, protests in front of the courthouse were common. On 10 May another demonstration occurred involving at least 1,000 people. The protesters, mainly relatives of the defendants, videotaped the demonstration, which the police did not interrupt. Demonstrators lined the streets around the courthouse, with women on one side and men on the other. By the 11th of May, over 4,000 demonstrators had gathered to hear the verdict. Prosecutors had asked for prison terms ranging from 3 to 7 years for 20 of the accused, offering to free the remaining 3. However, the government postponed the scheduled sentencing. The government arrested some of the protesters and relatives of the defendants late on 12 May. 13 May. On the night of 12 May or early in the morning of 13 May, armed men attacked the prison where the businessmen were held and freedom, along with hundreds of other prisoners, many of whom were charged with similar charges. Several prison guards were killed. The armed men, including the 23 defendants, also took over the regional administration building in Andijan, and took at least 20 law enforcement and government officials hostage, including the head of the prosecutor's office and the chief of the tax inspection authority. The militants unsuccessfully tried to seize the National Security Service headquarters in the city. They demanded the resignation of President Islam Karimov. Karimov's press office said that intensive negotiations proved fruitless. The militants, taking cover behind women and children, are refusing any compromise, the statement said. Encouraged by the prison break, even more protesters gathered in the central square to voice their anger over growing poverty and government corruption, speaking at microphones that were installed at Baba Square. Though government officials blocked the roads to Baba Square in the morning, they let people through on foot. Someone set fire to the Baba Theatre and Cinema. Government soldiers blocked the streets to the prison. Shooting incidents began in the morning. There was at least one exchange of gunfire between armed civilians and troops, but protesters remained on the square, apparently because of rumors that Karimov was coming to address their demands or because attempts to exit the square or surrender were refused. Around 1700 or 1800, the government launched a major offensive on the square without warning. There are reports that the protesters used government hostages as human shields in the front row as they tried to escape. According to Human Rights Watch, the government then sealed off the perimeter of the protest and opened fire. Some reports indicate indiscriminate firing by government troops, including the use of snipers, automatic rifles, and armored personnel carriers. It is unclear whether Karimov personally ordered the attack. Galima Bukarbeva, a journalist for IWPI, witnessed a mass of dead and wounded. At first, one group of armored personnel carriers approached the city square, and then another group appeared. They opened fire without mercy on everyone indiscriminately, including women and children. The crowd began to run in all directions. We dove into a ditch and lay there for a while. I saw at least 5 bloody corpses next to me. The rebels who are holding the provincial administration opened fire in response. They intend to stand to the end. When we got out of the ditch, we ran along the streets into the neighborhood, and now we're looking for a place where there's no shooting. But shots can be heard everywhere. The Uzbek government disputes this and states that only terrorists were killed. Several foreign news sources estimated the dead in Andijan as numbering between 400 to 600, with civilians accounting for almost all the victims. Some reports stated that troops had systematically shot the wounded after the first shootings. Uzbek President Islam Karimov placed blame for the unrest on Islamic extremist groups, a label that he has used to describe political opponents in recent years and that his critics say is used as a pretext for maintaining a repressive state. A press release from the government stated that, as a result of the clashes, 9 people died and 34 were injured. The government-controlled media within the country broadcast only brief statements regarding the crisis. In its news bulletins, Uzbek state TV said, an armed group of criminals had attacked the security forces in Andijan. The bandits seized dozens of weapons and moved on to attack a correctional colony, setting some convicts free. Describing the rebels as extremists, they claimed that 9 people had been killed and 34 wounded during the clashes. The local radio station had reportedly been taken off air. Authorities also blocked foreign TV news channels, including CNN and the BBC News. Allegations of government involvement. According to Ikram Yakubov, a major in Uzbekistan's secret service who defected to Britain in 2007, the government propped up Crimea, which the Uzbek government blamed for fomenting the sparking the incident led to the protests. He believes that the attack's incident was a pretext to repress dissenters. According to Yakubov, President Karimov personally ordered government troops to fire on the protesters. In some accounts, the troops involved in the massacre are from the Interior Ministry. Bernyshev and Chernik report that the 12,500 troops involved included the 17th Air Assault Brigade and a battalion of specialized operations from the Eastern Military District, a brigade of Rapid Reaction Forces and a separate battalion of Special Forces (SPAs) of the Ministry of Interior's internal troops, and 4 separate units of Special Forces of the National Security Service, mass graves. Mohammad Soli, founder and leader of the URK, Liberty Democratic Party political party in Uzbekistan, estimated more than 1,000 casualties in the massacre. Soli said the bodies were buried in mass graves holding 15 to 20 people each, or were thrown into the Karasu River. Between 13 and 14 May, 18 flights took 35 or more bodies from Andijan out of the city. Soli said, Andijan is a litmus test for countries who want influence in the region. Russia sees Central Asia as the source for religious extremism, while China fears a growth of internal separatists, but neither wants to recognize that Karimov gives strength to what they fear. The Chinese and Russian government's support for the Uzbek government allowed it to avoid an international investigation. Duraboy, a citizen of Andijan, led a Radio Free Europe correspondent to a mass grave on the far end of the city on the 27th of May 2005. Gravediggers told Radio Free Europe that 74 bodies were buried in the grave, and that there were 37 more secret graves, each containing 2 bodies. In the area, 3 trucks brought the first bodies on the 13th of May. On the 28th of May, 2 people murdered Duraboy. Some families of the deceased found the graves of their relatives, dug up the bodies, and reburied them according to Islamic burial rites. There is another known mass grave outside of Andijan in the Botanical Gardens in the center of the city. Vitaly Ponomarov, director of the Central Asia program at the Moscow-based Memorial Human Rights Center, said, planes flew out of Andijan beginning late in the evening on the 13th of May. In the course of 24 hours, there were around 18 flights. Our source for this information doesn't know where they were flying to, but he spoke with an eyewitness who talked about 36 bodies that were loaded into one plane alone. Aftermath. Despite the violent crushing of the protests, the following day thousands reappeared to demonstrate. Huge crowds shouted, "Killers, murderers," and again demanded the president step down. One man, speaking of the previous day's events, said, people were raising their hands up in the air showing they were without arms, but soldiers were still shooting at them. On the 14th of May, thousands seeking to flee the country stormed government buildings in the eastern frontier town of Korosov, 50 kilometers east of Andijan. They torched police officers and cars, before attacking guards on the Kyrgyz border. Uzbek troops sealed off the town. Authorities in Kyrgyzstan turned 6,000 Uzbeks away. Uzbek army helicopters were seen circling overhead. Saidjahan Zainabitdinov, head of Appeal, an Uzbek human rights organization, said 200 people were killed in Paktabad district on the 14th of May when government troops fought with a group crossing the border into Kyrgyzstan. On the 21st of May, police arrested him. According to the New York Times, here were reports of skirmishes in or near Andijan and of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of refugees making their way to Kyrgyzstan. There were indications that the Uzbek government, which normally maintains strict order, did not have full control of a portion of the valley. Numerous journalists were forced to flee the country following their coverage of the massacre, including Galima Burkabeva and German reporter Marcus Bensman. The state charged these journalists in absentia with providing informational support to terrorism. Peace Corps Uzbekistan closed its post in response to increased security threats, according to policy that corresponds with the security level of the in-country U.S. Embassy. On the 16th of May, several foreign news sources estimated the dead in Andijan as numbering between 400 to 600, with civilians accounting for almost all the victims. One report stated that troops had systematically shot the wounded after the first shootings. A press release on the same day on the official government website continued to maintain that, as a result of the clashes, 9 people died, sick, and 34 were injured. In 2008, defector Ikram Yakubov, a major in the SNB at the time of the incident, alleged that 1,500 people were killed, over twice the highest number estimated by outside observers. In October 2005, an Uzbek court found several Kyrgyz citizens guilty of several crimes revolving around involvement in the Andijan massacre. The government denied access to observers and refused to identify the defendants as the trial proceeded. In a 60-page report based on 50 interviews with victims and witnesses of the Andijan crackdown, Human Rights Watch said the killing of unarmed protesters by the Uzbek government on 13 May was so extensive and unjustified that it amounted to a massacre. Non-governmental organizations. After non-governmental organizations criticized the government's response, non-governmental organizations based in the Western world had their operations in Uzbekistan shut down on charges some analysts have criticized as spurious. In April 2006, an Uzbek court ordered the American Bar Association to end its activities after it gave funding to local non-governmental organizations. On 26 July, an Uzbek court ordered Winrock International, which gave technical expertise to farmers, to leave because the court found it had denigrated national values. The Uzbek government ordered Central Asian Free Exchange to leave on 7 July on the grounds that it had an unregistered logo and lacked an internet license. Urban Institute received an order to shut down on 12 July because their officials discussed the socio-economic and socio-political situation in Uzbekistan during a training session for a homeowner society, a violation of their charter. Other organizations that were ordered or pressured to leave Uzbekistan shortly after the Andijan massacre include global involvement through education, ecumenical charity service, Eurasia Foundation, Freedom House, the International Research and Exchanges Board, Counterpart International, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, the American Council for Collaboration in Education and Language Study, Internews Network, BBC World Service, Ezgalik, and the Uzbek branch of the UNHCR. Clan struggle theory. One interpretation of the unrest and the preceding trial, mainly espoused by Central Asian scholars, is an inter-clan struggle between the Tashkent-Fergana clan alliance and the rival Samarkand clan. On 25 May 2004, the Legislative Chamber of Andijan's regional government voted to impeach Kobalhan Obidov, the governor of Andijan and a leading member of the Fergana clan, replacing him with Saidullo Bagalayev, the former Minister of Agriculture and Water in the national government. Governor Obidov's involvement in several political scandals lost him favor with President Karimov, who personally attended his impeachment proceedings. According to an anonymous source who spoke with Eurojanet, Obidov was the province's master. Businesses favored by the Hakim got the green light for everything. All the entrepreneurs who enjoyed Obidov's patronage, including the 23 businessmen, grew rich. In late 2004, Karimov appointed Ikromkhan Najmadinov, who succeeded Bagalayev as the Minister of Agriculture and Water, governor of Fergana province. The source said, criminal proceedings were started against many of his, Obidov's, administration members. The new Hakim also decided to re-divide the businesses in the province. He cracked down on the entrepreneurs who had been supported by Obidov. They were told to sell the businesses for a pittance either to him, Bagalayev, or his people, or face legal proceedings. Prior to the Andijan massacre, the Samarkand clan maintained control over the Interior Ministry under the leadership of Zakir Almatov, and the Tashkent clan controlled the National Security Service under the leadership of Rustam Yadov. Rustam Burnashev and Irina Chernik of the Central Asia Institute argue that rumors of Karimov's resignation due to ill health prompted the two leaders to try to seize power. Both leaders considered coup d'états in 2004, early 2005, and in mid-2005. During the unrest, security forces under the authority of the Ministry of Defense acted as police forces. Ministry of Interior troops were abolished and counter-terrorism divisions were put under the command of the Ministry of Defense or the National Security Service, run by the Tashkent clan. Karimov fired Defense Minister Kadyrgaliyamov, Interior Minister Almatov, head of the Joint Headquarters of the Armed Forces Ismail Ergashev, and commander of the Eastern Military District Kosamilai Akhmedov. Karimov replaced Almatov with the deputy director of the SNB, a member of the Tashkent clan. This greatly shifted control of security to the Tashkent clan, which has traditionally controlled the SNB. Analysts had previously suggested that the Interior Ministry, under Almatov's leadership, had organized the 1999 Tashkent bombings. Others have suggested the bombings were done by the SNB under the leadership of Rustam Inoyatov, who at the time led the Tashkent clan. Analysts suggested a series of bombings in 2004 in Tashkent and Bukhara may have been done by the SNB against the Interior Ministry. Dilyor Dumabayev, a prominent member of Hezbollah Tahrir, later said in an interview in Karasu, Kyrgyzstan that in February 2005 SNB agents offered to pay Hezbollah Tahrir members to overthrow Andijan's government, but we refused. They said they were sick and tired of Karimov's regime. But we said, after Karimov will come another Karimov. We said such things as in. We did not participate. Abidov, initially put under house arrest, is now imprisoned in Tashkent. Karimov replaced Bagalayev with Ahmed Usmanov, the former security head of the Interior Ministry of Namangan Province, on 13 October 2006. Iqbal Mirsaitov, a Kyrgyz expert on Islam, said that trial and subsequent unrest was all about clan struggle. Documentary films. Several documentary films have been made about the Andijan massacre and its impact on the lives of those caught up in it. In 2010, the British journalist Monica Whitlock, who was the BBC correspondent in Uzbekistan at the time, made the 55-minute film Through the Looking Glass. The film incorporates testimony from survivors, who speak for the first time 5 years after the massacre. In 2012, the Danish journalist Michael Anderson completed the 80-minute film Massacre in Uzbekistan.